Something arrived at the brownstone that wasn't part of the case file. A cedar box, sealed tight with gratitude and smoke. But beneath the scent of rare cigars lingered the sharper tang of deception, and elegance sharp enough to kill. In a world where truth hides behind polished manners and a sapphire handle gleams too brightly, one wrong gift might just light the fuse. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Let me know in the comments. Let's begin the story. Thursday mornings at the brownstone have a rhythm. It starts with Fritz's Viennese roast, strong enough to wake a corpse and smooth enough to lull it back to sleep, and my ritual appointment with variety. Wolfe, upstairs with his orchids, never emerged before 11 unless a war broke out in Montenegro, or Fritz used margarine by mistake. Neither had happened, so I was left alone to sip and read. I was halfway through a piece on a Broadway flop, some musical featuring trapeze artists and Oedipal tension, when I heard the telltale triple chime at the door. I waited. Sometimes clients buzz and then change their minds, especially if they've read Wolfe's billing policies or caught a whiff of my sarcasm from the sidewalk. But the second buzz came firm and insistent, like someone who wasn't here for autographs or restaurant recommendations. I set the coffee down and strolled to the door, giving myself a moment to straighten my tie and prepare my most welcoming smirk. A dull Thursday had just developed potential. And in our line of work, potential either pays well or bleeds badly. Turned out, this one intended to do both. She had the look of old money done tastefully. No gaudy brooches, no desperate facelift, just a perfectly tailored suit in dove grey, and a string of pearls that would have had a Fifth Avenue jeweler nodding solemnly. I stepped aside and let her glide in because there's no other word for it. She glided like she paid the air not to resist her. "Mrs. Daphne Ansell," she said with a voice as polished as her shoes. "I have an urgent matter for Mr. Wolfe." "Of course," I said, gesturing her to the red chair, the one closest to the fireplace and furthest from Wolfe's temper. "I'm Archie Goodwin, Mr. Wolfe's assistant. If you'd like to—" She opened her handbag and produced a small, square velvet box. No words. Just the kind of pause people use when they're about to reveal something that's either terribly valuable or terribly incriminating. She handed it to me. Inside was a cigar cutter, the fancy kind, silver base, with a deep blue sapphire handle. The blade shimmered faintly in the light, but what drew my attention wasn't the cut of the steel. It was the dried, rusty smear along one edge. "I believe," she said calmly, "it may have been used in something unfortunate." You don't often hear murder and cigar, cutter in the same breath, unless you're at one of Wolfe's more heated dinner parties. But this one came wrapped in velvet and scandal. Mrs. Ansell sat with perfect posture, but her fingers tugged slightly at the clasp of her purse. That was the tell. The voice stayed calm. The pearls sat straight, but the hands, they were whispering another story. "It concerns my stepson, Grant," she said. "He hasn't been seen since Sunday evening. His bedroom was locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no footprints in the garden. Just silence. And the cutter. Found on the carpet next to the armchair," she said. "There was blood on it. His wallet was left behind. But no body, no note, no struggle." She paused. "And," she added, "there was a scent, a faint one. Camphor. I remember it from when my husband had sinus treatments. That one landed. Camphor meant drugs, possibly unconsciousness. It meant someone wanted Grant still, or worse." "You called the police?" "I have not. Not yet." That told me something else. Either she was hiding something, or she trusted Wolfe more than the cops. And both were good for business. Most clients, when they walk through our door, want bodies found, names cleared, and reputations restored. Mrs. Ansell, it turned out, was of a more specific persuasion. "I don't care where Grant is," she said. "What I need is for his name to be unburdened, before anyone else begins asking questions." Anyone like? The press, or the shareholders of Ansell Cigars. That one dropped like a stone in a glass pond. She wasn't here for closure. She was here for containment. The family business and the family reputation were sitting on the edge of a blade sharper than that cutter. I leaned back and studied her. She met my gaze without blinking, which made me respect her just a little more and trust her a lot less. "There's no police report," I said. "No. No ransom note. No contact from him. No. And you're not interested in whether he's alive, only whether he's innocent." She didn't answer, which in this business is usually the closest thing to the truth you'll get. I see. I didn't. Not fully, but I saw enough to know Wolfe would say no, and that I'd have to make him say yes. I left Mrs. Ansell downstairs sipping Fritz's cinnamon coffee and headed up to the roof-level plant rooms to deliver her tale to the man who, statistically speaking, had about a 92% chance of refusing it outright. Wolfe was elbow-deep in a battle with a new hybrid phalaenopsis that, by his account, refused to display coherence in petal formation. I stood just close enough to be ignored and waited for the usual grumble. "Archie, unless someone has died spectacularly in my office, this had better involve a crime or a cataclysm." "Possibly both," I said. "A missing heir, a locked room, a sapphire-handled cigar cutter stained with what looks a lot like dried blood." He raised an eyebrow without looking up. "No corpse?" "Nope." "No police?" "Not yet." "No client prone to hysteria?" "Client is Daphne Ansell, of Ansell Cigars." He turned fully then, eyes narrowing. "And the cutter? She brought it herself. Says she wants her stepson's name cleared before the press starts chewing." "Pfui," Wolfe said, going back to the orchid. "I don't chase phantoms, and I don't indulge corporate maneuvering. Even for 25 grand? He paused. The orchid was temporarily forgotten. Back downstairs, Mrs. Ansell had finished her coffee, but not her patience. I gave her the update. Wolfe's current diagnosis of phantom-chasing hysteria, and she didn't flinch. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "my late husband always said there were two things that could move the immovable, fire and finance. I assume Mr. Wolfe prefers the latter." She wasn't wrong. But Wolfe also liked logic, order, and puzzles tied in silk knots. And this one, even without a body, had shape. I took my time, offered another coffee, passed around the cinnamon cookies Fritz bakes when he wants something. Then I leaned close and said the thing that would do it. "You didn't mention the board of directors is voting on succession next week." She blinked, just once. "You think someone wanted Grant out of the picture permanently. I think someone wanted him erased. Maybe it worked, maybe not. Either way, it's a story Wolfe might want to read. And finish." She pulled out her checkbook, wrote a number that would buy Wolfe a month's worth of orchids and a week's worth of grudging attention. I took the check, and upstairs, I prepared to light the fire. The route to Wolfe's orchid rooms was paved with sins. The sin of interrupting his schedule, the sin of presenting him with anything resembling urgency, and perhaps worst of all, the sin of asking him to care. I climbed anyway. He was elbow-deep in the humid jungle of the third plant room, glaring at a cymbidium hybrid as though it had insulted his lineage. It was mottled purple, broad-petaled, and, if you asked me, looked like every other orchid I'd seen up there, except maybe slightly smugger. "This cymbidium," Wolfe said without preamble, "lacks integrity. It has ambition, but no structure, like a badly written novel with a seductive title." "Speaking of seductive," I said, "we've got a client downstairs, Daphne Ansell. The last name isn't a coincidence." Wolfe didn't look up. "The widow?" "Bingo. And she brought a little something with her, a sapphire-handled cigar cutter with what looks a whole lot like dried hemoglobin on the blade. That is absurd, possibly, but not dull. Her stepson Grant has vanished. Locked room mystery. Blood on the carpet. Cutter by the chair. No body. Pway. That one, at least, was predictable. Still, I stayed put. I've learned that with Wolfe, sometimes it's not the words that move him. It's the right scent. And this case was starting to smell like something he might follow, even if he claimed it was beneath him. Wolfe finally emerged from the plant room, wearing the expression of a man who'd just seen a masterpiece defaced. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. A sapphire-handled cigar cutter, he said flatly. How baroque. It gets better, I told him as we descended. She doesn't want her stepson found, just his name cleared, before shareholders get twitchy. He stopped mid-step. Ah, the R was layered. Wolfe's version of someone raising an eyebrow, tapping a monocle, and sniffing a scandal all in one syllable. And the press? Not yet involved. That is at least something. I deplore the press. Only when they spell your name wrong. We reached the office. Wolfe dropped into his chair like a man burdened by a society that refused to value reason. He looked at the cutter again, which I'd left on the desk in a plastic tray. Fritz's idea, to protect the varnish. Bloodstains aren't great for mahogany. It is vulgar, Wolfe said, both in design and implication. Still sharp. I would hope not. No one sharpens ceremonial cutters. Unless they want them to stop being ceremonial. He grunted. A second fouaille was hovering on his lips when the office door creaked, uninvited, unannounced, and Mrs. Daphne Ansell made her entrance like someone accustomed to it. Wolfe turned. His face did not change, but I noticed he sat up straighter, which, in his language, is the equivalent of leaping to his feet. I do apologize, Mrs. Ansell said smoothly, closing the office door behind her without waiting for permission. But I've never been good at waiting for doors to be opened for me. Wolfe regarded her as he might an unexpected fungus blooming in his orchid trays. Madam, I did not summon you. No, Mr. Wolfe, but you do seem to be listening now. She moved to the red chair, settled herself, and folded her gloves with surgical precision. Then she looked directly at Wolfe. Not me. Wolfe. She knew where the decision lived. The cutter, she said, glancing toward the tray, was part of a pair commissioned for my late husband. Decorative. Silver base. Sapphire inlay. Never meant to function. Grant knew that, which is why its presence in his locked room, covered in what appears to be blood, is troubling. You presume it was placed. I presume very little, she said. I merely observe. Wolfe's eyes flicked to me, then back to her. What do you wish? I wish the suspicion removed from my stepson's name. Quietly. Before the press or shareholders begin murmuring about scandal, there is no room in business for ghosts or gossip. And what, Wolfe asked, do you offer in return for this selective exorcism? She reached into her handbag and drew out a folded check. She placed it gently on the desk. 50,000, she said. For logic, not sentiment. Wolfe tapped the tray with one finger. It was a concession. The check sat on Wolfe's desk like a rare orchid, delicate, desirable, and unlikely to bloom without careful handling. Wolfe stared at it, then at Mrs. Ansell. This, madam, is substantial, but I am not for sale. Of course not, she said without blinking. Only rented, temporarily. It was a line that might have earned a raised voice from a less controlled man. Wolfe merely reached for his beer and took a slow sip, as though hydrating his better judgment. She's clever, I said helpfully. And she doesn't even need us to find the guy. Just clear his name. We're not chasing a ghost. We're rearranging a narrative. Which is precisely the problem. Wolfe leaned back. Truth is not malleable to convenience. No, I said, but logic can be. He grunted. That meant the hook was in. She claims the cutter was symbolic, that it couldn't have harmed anyone. Claims, Wolfe echoed. How typical. No evidence, no corpse, a locked room, and a melodramatic prop. This is theatre. She's offering box office, I replied. $50,000 worth. He sighed. It is not justice I am preserving, he muttered. It is the dignity of deduction. And with that, the deal was struck, not out of pity or curiosity, but out of sheer intellectual irritation. Wolfe hated nonsense, but he hated unsolved puzzles even more. There will be conditions, Wolfe said, eyes narrowing. Mrs. Ansell inclined her head. Naturally. No contact with the police unless I deem it essential. No press statements, no leaks to business journals. You will defer to me entirely in all matters of method. Agreed. You will not attempt to conceal facts for strategic advantage. I am not your lawyer. Understood. You will answer all questions fully, regardless of discomfort. If I have the answers, you will not lie. That one hung in the air like smoke. She didn't nod immediately, but she didn't break eye contact either. I understand, she said finally. Wolfe gave a slight nod. Then the matter is accepted. Archie, I know, I said, rising. Hat, notebook, and a smile just wide enough to unsettle everyone. Indeed, Wolfe said. Go. Mrs. Ansell stood. One more thing, she said. You won't mention Ansell Cigars in your notes. Wolfe's smile was faint. Only if the truth requires it, which from him was both a promise and a threat. I was at the coat rack, adjusting my hat just so, when Wolfe spoke again, quietly, but with all the weight of a man instructing a bomb technician. You are not merely gathering facts, Archie. You are navigating a minefield. I do that every time I interview someone with a trust fund. He ignored me. There are reputations involved, not merely a missing man. That alone ensures obstruction. Got it. You must stay 2 steps ahead of the newspapers, he said, and 1 behind the murderer. I turned. Behind? If you get ahead, Wolfe said, you might be mistaken for the threat. That's a cheerful image. He leaned back in his chair and reached for the bottle opener. Return with something useful, he added, or not at all. I tipped my hat. Say it with flowers, Wolfe, not with farewells. He didn't look up. That meant I had clearance. I walked out the door with a fedora, a notebook, and a promise to tiptoe through lies, silk curtains, and freshly waxed marble halls. Because nothing screams innocent like a family trying to keep a secret quiet before it starts bleeding. If you ever want to know how someone made their money, skip the resume and check the foyer. The Ansell estate in Westchester had all the subtlety of a monogrammed money clip. Terracotta roof tiles gleamed under late afternoon light, wrought iron gates curled like jealous fingers, and a hedge of boxwood lined the drive like it was guarding buried treasure. I rang the bell and braced myself for a butler who looked down on city folk and smelled faintly of arrogance. I wasn't disappointed. Hayes, the butler, opened the door with a gaze that said, my credentials were insufficient for entry, until I said, Mr. Wolfe, at which point the eyebrow lifted a 1/4 inch and the door opened the rest of the way. Inside, the air was humid with money and the unmistakable tang of cigar smoke that had settled into the woodwork like an old war wound. The place didn't just smell like a cigar lounge. It was a cigar lounge, reincarnated as a living room. The rugs were Persian, the ceiling high-beamed, and the grief floating in the air had the scent of being ironed and folded for display. Hayes led me through a hall lined with oil portraits of scowling men and over-furred dogs, and left me standing in a drawing room that whispered, conflict resolution via inheritance attorney. It wasn't long before the Ice Queen made her entrance. Esther Ansell didn't glide into the room. She arrived like a weather front. You didn't see her coming so much as feel the temperature drop by 5 degrees. She was tall, tightly groomed, and wore a silk blouse so starched I expected it to stand up and salute. Her handshake was cool, brief, and aimed to establish the tone of the interview. You're Mr. Goodwin. Guilty, I said, but only professionally. She didn't smile, not even a twitch. "I've spoken to Daphne," she said, seating herself with precision. "I assume she's the one who engaged Mr. Wolfe." "She is. You're his wife?" "Felix's second, Grant's stepmother." "And your opinion on the matter of Grant's disappearance?" "I don't offer opinions," she said. "Only facts." "Then let's start with those. When did you last see Grant?" "Sunday evening, around 8. He had dinner, went to his room. That was the last I heard of him." "And?" She blinked slowly. "I assumed he'd gone to the city. He often does." "In the middle of the night, without his wallet?" "I didn't search his wallet." "No, but the maid did." "I don't engage in gossip, Mr. Goodwin." "No," I said, scribbling in my notebook. "But you don't seem surprised your stepson vanished either." "Grant," she said evenly, "is prone to dramatics." She said it with a calm that was colder than contempt. That kind of distance doesn't come from fear. It comes from preparation. The butler returned with the subtlety of a whisper and announced that Mr. Royce would join us shortly. Shortly turned out to be about a minute and a half. Enough time for Esther to straighten a pillow that didn't need straightening and for me to wonder how many skeletons this house had and how many had legal counsel. Carl Royce came in dressed like the 5th paragraph of a press release. Tan linen suit, polished loafers, a tie that cost more than my coat, and a smile stretched so thin it should have snapped under its own insincerity. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, extending a hand. "I understand Mr. Wolfe has taken an interest." "Something like that. I hear you're the family's legal compass." "I prefer advisor. The term lawyer tends to make people either defensive or dishonest." He chuckled. I didn't. "What's your take on Grant's disappearance?" Royce pursed his lips, as though weighing the market value of concern. "I assume he needed space. There's been tension lately." "Between him and whom?" Royce's smile didn't falter, but the eyes flicked, a quick glance at Esther. "Family matters," he said. "No doubt. So you don't find it odd that he left behind his wallet?" "Not necessarily. Some people retreat. Others get pushed." He paused, then let out a light laugh. "You ask good questions, Mr. Goodwin. And you give good non-answers, Mr. Royce." His smile stayed, but the temperature dropped another degree. I was starting to wonder if the entire Ansell household ran on freon and legal ambiguity. I had just closed my notebook when another presence made itself known. A flash of perfume, heels that sounded expensive, and a rustle of silk that tried a little too hard. Marietta Glenn breezed in like a woman, on the verge of unraveling, but determined to look like she'd just come from brunch. She was younger than Esther, prettier than Daphne, and clearly aware of it. But her eyes were darting, and her posture had a tremble that even pearl earrings couldn't cover. "Oh," she said, freezing slightly when she saw me. "You're not with the police?" "No, ma'am," I said. "Wolfe and Goodwin. We ask smarter questions and make better coffee." She gave a brittle laugh, then sat down across from me, smoothing her skirt with hands that didn't quite stop shaking. "I suppose you're here about Grant." "You suppose right. When did you last see him?" "Sunday. He was upset, angry." "At?" "Carl," she said. They had an argument about the will." "Felix's will?" "Yes." Her voice wavered. I glanced at her hand. On the 3rd finger sat a diamond, tasteful, conservative, and entirely new. "Nice ring," I said. She flushed. "Carl and we weren't hiding it. It just wasn't the right time." "For an engagement?" "Yes." "Or for a murder?" She looked at me, suddenly pale. "I didn't kill him," she whispered. "And I didn't love Carl the way I—" She stopped herself. But I heard it. And so, I suspected, had Esther, standing silently in the doorway. Lou Ansell didn't walk into the room. He ambled, like a man who wanted everyone to know that he had nowhere else he'd rather be, and no one else he needed to impress. Tan, trim. With a blazer, he wore like a challenge, and loafers that had seen more beach bars than boardrooms. He had the self-satisfied air of a man who used phrases like, "built it myself," and didn't take a dime from the family. "Goodwin, huh?" he said, shaking my hand like he was auditioning to crush walnuts. "Wolfe's guy, heard about you." "I try to be, heard just enough," I said. "Not so much I end up in court transcripts." He grinned and reached into a pocket. "Cigar." It was a reflex test and I knew it. I took one, made a show of sniffing it, then slipped it into my breast pocket. I didn't need to smoke his gift to know it wasn't really a gift. "I hear you and Grant were close. As close as cousins get without borrowing each other's shirts," he said. "Though he was more high-strung." "That so?" "Sure. Pressure of being the heir. Me, I like a clean slate. Built my own business in Florida. Didn't want the Ansel legacy. Then why stay here?" He shrugged. "Family loyalty." That one landed like a wet sock. I smiled. Lou was lying. Not badly, but just enough for the corners to fray. And that meant he was worth keeping an eye on. Grant Ansel's room was upstairs, west wing, second door on the left. Hayes unlocked it like he was performing a ritual, then stepped back without crossing the threshold. He didn't have to. The smell did the work for him. Not rot. Not quite. But something metallic, stale, and faintly medicinal. Like blood left in the air too long. The room was neat. Disturbingly so. A leather armchair sat by the window, angled toward a chessboard on the side table. The board was mid-game. Black knight tilted, white queen in retreat. Across the rug, near the bed, a dried splash of burgundy had soaked into the fibres like a permanent bruise. Near it lay the cutter. Silver base. Sapphire handle. Resting open like a mouth that had just confessed something and wasn't taking it back. Grant's wallet was still on the dresser, fanned slightly, credit cards untouched. His cufflinks were in a dish. There was no sign of struggle, no overturned chair, no shattered glass. I bent low, inspecting the edge of the carpet. And there it was. A cigar band. Torn, crumpled, discarded, but not useless. In small, cramped ink, someone had written two initials, MG. That made the second clue smell even stronger than the first. I found Hayes dusting an already clean banister, which, in my experience, meant he was avoiding questions. So I asked them anyway. "Tell me again," I said. "What time Grant went to his room on Sunday?" "Approximately 9 o'clock, sir. He took a brandy and retired." "Anyone see him after that?" "No, sir." "You check on him?" "Not unless requested. Mr. Grant valued his privacy." I leaned against the rail. "And nobody went in? Not even you?" He straightened, cloth poised like a duelist's rapier. "Certainly not." "Any visitors? Loud noises? Unusual scents? Camphor, maybe?" His eyes flicked, just once, and then steadied. "No, sir." That was too smooth. "Security cameras?" "The estate believes in discretion, not surveillance." "How noble." I stepped closer. "You're sure no one entered that room? I would have noticed." "You would have, or you did." Silence. Hayes's face was carved from centuries of service, but the edges were fraying. Something had crossed his line of sight that night, and he'd decided it wasn't worth reporting. That usually meant one of two things, fear or favor. I made a note to figure out which. I was halfway back to the foyer when Thunder rolled in flannel. Inspector Kramer. He pushed past the butler like a man late to a confession and smelled blood. "Goodwin, what the hell is Wolfe doing sniffing around this?" "Sniffing is your department, Inspector. We deal in logic and invoices. You've got no jurisdiction here. We've got a client." He scowled, steam practically rising from his collar. "You interfere, and I'll have you both trussed like Sunday ham. Only if you promise gravy." Kramer reached into his coat for a pad. I leaned in. "Between you and me, off the record, Wolfe thinks it's a suicide." He blinked. "A what?" Locked room, no signs of entry, melancholy air, tragic symbolism, very literary. He stared at me, chewing it over. Tell Wolfe to keep his mouth shut, or I'll shut it for him. And with that, Kramer stormed off. I didn't exhale until he was gone. It was a bluff, but it bought us time. It was Lou's den that finally coughed up something worth pocketing. While the family gathered for cocktails and recriminations, I slipped in under the pretense of needing the powder room. What I needed was answers. His den was cluttered in a curated way. Weight sets, old boxing gloves, Florida brochures, and a glass case of vintage cigar cutters. Most were gold. One wasn't. Near the back, in a drawer beneath some faded magazines, sat a second sapphire-handled cutter, identical to the one found upstairs. Two identical. I slipped on gloves, lifted it gently. No blood, but the blade looked newly cleaned. I didn't have Wolfe's brain, but I had instincts, and they were yelling that someone had gone to great lengths to make one cutter into two, or two into one, and bury the timeline in confusion. I replaced the cutter, left the room with nothing in my hands, and everything on my mind. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had the two sapphire-handled cigar cutters displayed side by side on a linen napkin, like twin relics awaiting benediction. One had dried blood in the groove. The other gleamed like a showroom piece. "I abhor duplicity," Wolfe announced from his chair, not bothering to look at me. "But duplication is worse. It pretends at clarity while offering confusion." "Maybe the killer bought a matching set," I offered, pouring a splash of beer into his glass. "One for the scene, one for the frame job." He made a sour face. "Your gift for metaphor does not redeem your logic. The duplication suggests one of two things. Either someone intends to blur the timeline of possession, or the cutters were always symbolic and only recently weaponized. Like a saber at a parade turning sharp. Indeed." He turned back to the cutters. A blade unused, displayed, decorative. Until one day it tastes blood. And now we're meant to wonder which one did the tasting. "And we don't even have a body," I added. Wolfe frowned. "A corpse substantiates a crime. Without one, all we have is theatre. I detest theatre." "But you do love a stage." He gave me a glance sharp enough to shear felt. Then he turned back to the cutters, fingers steepled. "Find me facts, Archie, not props." Saul Panzer showed up just after 6 with the quiet efficiency of a man who tracked fugitives through airports and through basements without changing his coat. "He took out 10,000, Saul said, standing by the desk, arms folded. 2 days before he vanished. From a downtown Chase branch, cash withdrawal. No note, no witness, no explanation." "Unusual?" Wolfe asked. "For Grant? Yes. He was the wire transfer type. Debit cards, paper trails. Meaning this was meant to vanish," I said. Saul nodded. "Used his ID, real account, signature matched. Teller said he looked calm, maybe a little pale. She thought he had a cold." "Or a conscience," I muttered. Wolfe leaned back. "Did he speak to anyone?" "No calls, no texts. His phone's off. His emails stopped the night he disappeared. No pings on any cards." "Did the bank have cameras?" Saul pulled a photo from his folder. "They did." It was a grainy shot, but clear enough. Grant, or someone looking a damn lot like him, stood at the teller window in a charcoal suit, one hand in his coat pocket. The timestamp was 2 days before Daphne rang our bell. 10 grand in clean bills, I said. "That's enough to run." "Or enough to fake a run," Saul added. Wolfe tapped a finger against the arm of his chair. "Either way, someone paid for silence. The question is, did Grant buy it, or was he the product?" I was halfway through a leftover apple tart when the phone rang. Fritz answered, and by the way his voice lost all its cinnamon warmth, I knew something had happened. "It is Miss Marietta Glenn," he said. "She sounds distressed." I took the call. I was almost hit, she said. A delivery truck. On 5th and 19th. I stepped off the curb and it swerved at me. Did you get a plate? No. No. It was fast. I don't know if it was on purpose, but can you come? She sounded shaken. And considering we were looking into a vanished heir and a blood-stained cutter, I figured someone trying to turn her into a hood ornament was worth checking out. 15 minutes later, I was at her apartment. She opened the door in a robe, her arm bruised where she said she'd hit the mailbox diving out of the way. A cup of untouched tea steamed on the table. She looked more rattled than rehearsed. You think someone wanted to shut me up, she whispered. I watched her hands. They were shaking, not faking. What is it they think you'd say? She looked down. Maybe that Grant found something about the will. And maybe Carl knew. She nodded. Outside, a horn blared faintly in the distance. Something told me Marietta wasn't the only one being warned. Marietta had calmed some by the time the tea turned cold. She was on the couch now, a dainty ice pack wrapped in a dish towel pressed against her wrist. I sat opposite, watching the mask of society girl composure chip at the corners. I didn't mean for any of it, she said softly. For the truck? Or the engagement? She didn't answer right away. I was with Grant for nearly 3 years, she said. I thought we'd be married. But then Felix, his father, died, and suddenly Carl became attentive and useful. Convenient, I offered. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Yes, convenient. And the will? She exhaled. The original one left nearly everything to Grant. The company, the estate, the cigar portfolio. But it was changed. Quietly. Carl showed me. And I told Grant. It was 2 days before he disappeared. I waited. She didn't. He was furious. Not at me, at Esther. He said she'd pushed Felix into it. Said Carl had handled the paperwork. Said he wasn't going to let them get away with it. And then, she looked down. He kissed me. Said it might be the last time. Then he walked out. Did you follow? No, she said. But now I wish I had. I delivered the confession to Wolfe with the care of a man transporting live explosives. Fritz had just brought in a pot of cassoulet, and I waited until the spoon hit the saucer before beginning. She spilled, I said. Turns out the will was altered. Grant found out just before he vanished. Carl showed Marietta the revised version. Wolfe didn't blink. He laid his spoon down precisely. The implication? That Felix left Grant with considerably less than advertised, and that Esther, with Carl's help, had her hands on the pen. Ha, Wolfe muttered. How trite. He stood and paced to the globe, pressing his fingertips together. Inheritance is the oldest motive in the lexicon. When paired with romantic betrayal, it becomes positively operatic. And the 10 grand? Ah, yes, the cash. A symbol, Mr. Goodwin, of either desperation or design. Grant could have taken it to disappear. Or someone could have taken it for him. I raised an eyebrow. You think he's dead? I think someone wants us to believe he is. And that is not the same. He tapped the tray with the twin cutters on his desk. One blade to vanish, one blade to frame, and perhaps one person left holding both. I was about to ask who when the phone rang, and with it, another piece of the puzzle walked in wearing fur. It was Carl Royce, and he wasn't expecting company. He'd left the Ansel estate around 4, heading south in his navy coupe. I tailed him from a polite distance, just close enough to catch his turns, not close enough to spook him. He parked in front of the Delacroix Lounge, a cigar club downtown where membership required a surname in bronze and a bloodline in mahogany. I waited 2 minutes, then slipped in behind him, blending in with the late afternoon professionals looking to exhale stress and inhale vanity. Carl was easy to spot. Tan suit, loafers, a little too much hair product. He took a back booth and ordered something brown and neat. He wasn't alone long. She entered like she'd never seen daylight. Black fur hat, scarlet lipstick, heels that clicked out secrets. She sat without pleasantries, pulled off her gloves, and accepted a thick envelope Carl slid across the table. Cash, by the bend of it. They didn't talk much, but what they did say was low, murmured, a whisper from Carl, a nod from her. Then he leaned in and said something else, and she laughed. Not a flirt, not a joke. It was the kind of laugh that cut glass and remembered debts. I memorized her profile and slipped out before dessert. Whoever she wasn't just a rendezvous. She was an accomplice. She left first. Carl stayed for a second drink, maybe to give her cover. I tailed her out and caught the plate. New York tags, 9YF 2317, black sedan, minor dent in the rear bumper. She didn't rush, didn't look over her shoulder, which meant either she was seasoned or so confident she didn't need to be. But what stuck with me wasn't the car. It was the laugh, sharp, nasal, dismissive, the kind of sound that walks away from wreckage without checking the rearview mirror. I'd heard it before, somewhere, not in person, maybe a phone recording, maybe court testimony, but it stuck, like the smell of a cigar you didn't smoke. I wrote it all down in my notebook, plate, date, description. Then I headed back to the brownstone, because when a woman like that takes cash from a family lawyer and laughs like she already spent it, someone's about to die. I was back at the brownstone an hour when the phone rang again. Fritz answered. His voice, always a measure of calm, dipped just slightly. "For you," he said. "Inspector Kramer." "Goodwin," I said into the line. "You tell Wolfe to get his fat head ready," Kramer barked. "We pulled a floater from the East River, male, mid-30s. Wallet's missing, face is a mess. But he's wearing Grant Ansell's coat. Dead? Very. You sure it's Grant? No, but I'm betting his mother will be, and I'm betting you two are involved." I hung up, turned to Wolfe. "They fished a body," I said, "wearing Grant's coat." Wolfe closed his eyes. "It's too soon," he said softly. "Too convenient." "Think it's staged?" "I think it's confirmation, but not of what they hope." He reached for a beer, then changed his mind. Something told me the river had just washed up more than a corpse. Wolfe had the coroner's report spread before him like a condemned man facing scripture. His lips curled in disdain just above the rim of his beer. I leaned back in my chair, arms folded, watching him perform his ritual of surgical intellect. "Goodwin," he murmured, "this corpse is a fiction." "Could have fooled the river," I said. "Looks a lot like Grant Ansell to me. Same coat, same height, same jawline, what's left of it." He jabbed a finger at the paragraph in question. "The second metatarsal on the right foot, healed improperly. A fracture from 2 years prior, no doubt untreated." "Yeah?" I said, getting up and pacing to the bookshelf just to stretch my legs. "You think Grant never broke a toe?" "No," Wolfe snapped. "I think he did not. Because he told Dr. Lathrop, his podiatrist, precisely so, repeatedly. The man jogged, wore imported loafers, and, complained of a bunion. He would not have tolerated a fractured metatarsal." That earned a low whistle from me. "So you're saying the stiff in the East River's wearing Grant's coat, but not his bones?" "I am not saying," Wolfe intoned. "I am deducing," and with that, he rang for Fritz and asked for coffee. Kramer was going to love this. It didn't take long to find the crack in Carl Royce's polished armour. I'd leaned on a source downtown, an old friend who used to push papers for a probate judge and still owed me 2 favours and a rye sandwich. Half an hour later, I had a scanned copy of Felix Ansell's will dated 2 years ago, with Grant neatly ensconced as the principal heir. Then came the revision. This one filed a week before Felix had his final nap in the sunroom. The ink still smelled fresh. Back in the brownstone, Wolfe flicked through the copies with a mild grunt of disgust. "Royce has the subtlety of a bad poet," he declared. "Then I guess we're dealing with murder in iambic pentameter," I offered. "Pfui. Look here, on page 3. This phrasing." Wolfe tapped with one thick finger. All holdings, both liquid and illiquid, shall pass to Carl Royce, Escon, for fiduciary redistribution. A redundancy and a fraud. You're sure he forged it? Certain. The notary's signature is from a woman who died last year. That is, unless she was resurrected to witness the transfer of $7 million. I let out a long, low whistle. Wolfe said, Mr. Ansell was not merely removed. He was erased. If Fred Durkin had a nose for anything besides cold pastrami, it was tracking down people who didn't want to be found. And Magdalore had made a career out of vanishing, sometimes from ethics boards, sometimes from ex-husbands, and once, apparently, from a Swiss sanitarium. She's the one, Archie, Fred had told me over the phone, sounding like he'd just bagged a moose. Came out of the lobby of the Excelsior Club with a fur hat and a face like chilled stone. Lives in a townhouse in Murray Hill under the name Marianne Leclerc. Real cozy with Royce. Used to be Ansell's therapist, if you can believe it. I could. Especially when Wolfe heard the name and muttered something unprintable in Greek. She treats ailments of the mind, Wolfe growled, with the discretion of a butcher treating gout. The file Fred had scraped together painted quite the portrait. Disbarred in Belgium, censured in New York, and rumoured to have had relationships with at least 3 patients, one of whom was currently in a sanatorium and thought he was the Prince of Wales. She's not just a side player, I told Wolfe. She's a damned harpstring, plucked by both men. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Then let us listen to the tune. If there's one thing Wolfe detests more than people, it's scents, unless they originate from Fritz's kitchen. So when the crime scene reeked of camphor, I knew the old man would take it personally. He sat in the red chair, brows lowered, hands templed like a disappointed deity. The scent sample I'd brought in, a waxy shard of hardened residue scraped from the Ansell townhouse mantel, lay under the magnifying glass on his desk. Camphor, he declared, but not in its modern form. I don't think it was mothballs, I said. Unless someone was trying to preserve a corpse in their parlour. No, Wolfe said. It's an old blend. Once used in sedative wax infusions, rubbed on the temples, diffused over warm water, often with vanilla or lavender to disguise its astringency, used by charlatans posing as healers. Fritz, who'd brought in the tray of canapés and lingered with one eyebrow raised, sniffed. Ah, he barked. Magdalore. That woman once attempted a camphor infusion in a glaze for duck, ruined it, in 2007. Wolfe gave a sharp nod. She used the same preparation at the scene, a nostalgic signature, not out of sentimentality, but arrogance. Like a calling card, I asked. Like a fingerprint dipped in oil, he replied. It took Saul Panzer less than 24 hours to crack Lou Ansell open like a 2-bit walnut. He came in looking like he'd just stepped out of a tax audit, overcoat rumpled, expression bland as milk. Florida, he said, sitting. Palm City, 2014. Lou Ansell was living under the name Howard Sipes, held a job at a marina for 6 months, got friendly with a widow, lifted her identity papers, and almost walked away with 200 grand in pension annuities. Got caught forging her signature on a withdrawal form. Charges dropped after she recanted. Wolfe didn't even blink. Why the alias? To dodge IRS heat, and maybe the widow's son, who owned a 38 and a bad temper. I whistled low. So our respectable brother of the allegedly dead is a part-time snake. A self-made man, Wolfe said, is often self-invented. In this case, the fabrication is thin. Mr. Ansell is less phoenix and more barnyard crow in a top hat. You want me to press him? I asked. No, not yet, Wolfe replied. Let him simmer. It's always instructive to observe liars while they believe they remain undiscovered. I handed Wolfe the second sapphire-handled cigar cutter, wrapped in tissue like it was some holy relic. He didn't reach for it, just stared at it, the way a chess master eyes a piece that shouldn't be on the board. There were 2, I said. This one was found in the umbrella stand at the Ansell house. The first was in the dead man's coat pocket. Identical? Wolfe asked. Nearly. Same handle design, same blade curve. But I trailed off and pulled a small scratch card from my pocket. This one hasn't been used at all. That got a grunt, the Wolfe equivalent of a drum roll. A plant, he said, intended to confuse the timeline, perhaps even the motive. Or the detective. He frowned at me. Apologies, I added. I mean a lesser detective. Wolfe leaned back, pressing his fingertips together. 2 cutters, one for the crime, one for deception. It is an old stage magician's trick, redundancy to suggest misdirection. Stage magic? You think we're up against a performer? No, Wolfe said. But certainly someone who appreciates the value of distraction. The second cutter is noise, and noise, Mr. Goodwin, must always be filtered if we are to hear the truth. I was at the office window, weighing whether to trail Magda again or pay a social call on Lou with a recorder and a smirk, when the front bell rang. Fritz answered it, and 3 seconds later, I heard something crash in the hall, followed by a sharp intake of breath. I stepped into the room, just in time to see Grant Ansell walk in, alive, upright, breathing, and carrying the kind of stillness that comes from walking out of your own obituary. His skin had the colour of cold milk, hair wet, clothes wrinkled, but his eyes, they weren't just tired, they were watching. "Where's Wolfe?" he asked, his voice soft but tight as piano wire. Wolfe, who hadn't looked up from his chair, finally spoke. "Mr. Ansell, you are, at last, both late and inconvenient." Grant stepped forward. "I want to know who killed my father, and who tried to kill me." "You will," Wolfe said, "if you sit, remain quiet, and allow your resurrection to serve logic, not drama." I sat back down and crossed my legs. "Well," I said, "now we have a motive, a survivor, and 2 Sapphire Cigar cutters." Grant didn't smile. "And a hell of a score to settle." Grant Ansell looked like a ghost who'd spent too much time in the sun and not enough time under a showerhead. His collar was limp, the cuffs of his shirt wore the city's grime like epaulets, and his shoes carried enough crusted dirt to grow window herbs. But it wasn't the mess that threw me. It was the eyes. They were hollow in the way that tells you a man's been somewhere he shouldn't have and seen more than he was meant to. Wolfe didn't offer him a seat, or water, or so much as a grunt of welcome. "Speak," Wolfe said, "and do so with efficiency." "I didn't know where else to go," Grant began, voice cracked. "Mr. Goodwin will verify that you are, regrettably, breathing. Now explain, in full sentences, how it is that a man presumed dead walks into my office with soil on his soles and silence on his lips." Grant looked at me, then back at Wolfe. He swallowed like it hurt. "I was drugged," he said. "I woke up in a stranger's apartment. No idea how I got there." Wolfe's brow didn't budge. "Then begin with what you remember before unconsciousness. You may omit your preferred brand of soap." "It was Thursday night," Grant said. "I was in the sunroom, going through some old files. The lights flickered, and I smelled something sharp. Camphor, I think. The next thing I knew, I was waking up on a lumpy couch next to a space heater with a busted leg." "Where?" I asked. "South Bronx. I only figured it out after I climbed out the fire escape and walked 3 blocks until I found a bodega." "Wallet?" I asked. "Gone. Phone too." "And your pride, probably," I muttered. Wolfe tapped a pencil against his notepad. "Did you recognize the apartment?" "No. It was filthy, empty of personal effects, like a drop site." "The camphor," Wolfe prompted. "It was on my skin. I could smell it in my hair. I think it was used to knock me out." "You were not bound?" Wolfe asked. "No, just dumped." "That is sloppy," Wolfe murmured, "and curious." I leaned against the credenza. "Any chance this was a friend playing a practical joke with hallucinogens and a flair for real estate?" Grant didn't laugh. "I think someone wanted me out of the way." "Then they failed," Wolfe said. "And now we must learn why they were so inept." "I wasn't just rifling through papers for fun," Grant said. 2 nights before I disappeared, I found something I wasn't supposed to. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. The will, Grant said. The one Carl claimed he filed last year. I saw it. But it had changes I didn't recognize. Big ones. You had access? Wolfe asked. I used the spare key. I knew Carl kept his files locked in the credenza. I wasn't trying to steal anything, just protect my share. Which was being redirected, Wolfe asked. More than that. It looked like the bulk of it was going to Magda. Not a portion, the majority. And some trust for her niece. Carl always said everything would be split down the middle. And you were going to confront him? I asked. Yeah. I was planning to the next morning. But then, well, I woke up next to a radiator in a neighborhood I'd never stepped foot in. I glanced at Wolfe. So he finds a forged will, tries to blow the whistle, and gets chemically disappeared. Sounds like motive with a side of malpractice. Wolfe didn't reply immediately. Then, in a slow, dry tone, it is not merely motive. It is a storm forming over shallow waters. Grant tugged something from his coat pocket, a folded receipt, creased and tired. I mailed the cutter, he said. To Magda, 5 days ago. Overnight express. You mailed it? I asked. As in, to warn her or woo her? As a message, Grant said. I wanted her to know I saw what she and Carl were trying to do. I figured if she opened a package and saw that ceremonial cutter, the one Dad kept on the mantel like it was sacred, she'd know I was coming back. Wolfe tapped his fingers slowly on the chair arm. And what precisely did you expect her to do in response? Panic, reconsider, tell Carl to back off. You believed she'd interpret a symbolic blade as a friendly nudge. Grant shrugged. It wasn't a threat. No, Wolfe said, voice tightening. Just an ambiguous gesture involving a bladed instrument associated with the deceased, magnificently subtle. And she used it, I added, as proof of foul play. Said it showed intent. Yours. Grant looked away. I said, so either she's twisting your message into a murder prop, or you're twisting a murder weapon into a love letter. Wolfe's eyes flicked open wider. Both interpretations are problematic. Neither is exculpatory. Wolfe listened through the entire tale with the facial animation of a Roman bust. Eyes half-lidded, mouth fixed in its usual slight downturn, the expression he reserves for garden club newsletters and federal subpoenas. When Grant finally ran out of air, Wolfe raised one elegant eyebrow. It was less an expression than a verdict. Implausible, he said. Incomplete and insultingly theatrical. Grant sat forward. I'm telling the truth. Then your truth lacks detail, coherence, and the one quality most essential to a narrative, verifiability. I can prove it, Grant snapped. Ask the post office. Ask... I shall, Wolfe interrupted. But first, you will remain here. Grant blinked. What? You are not leaving this house tonight. For your own protection. Or, failing that, for mine. I'm not a prisoner. No, Wolfe said. But you are inconveniently resurrected, moderately suspicious, and likely to vanish again under circumstances requiring paperwork. You will remain under Mr. Goodwin's watch. I gave him my best smile. You snore, I get earplugs. You run, I call the cops. Grant stood, then sat again. This is ridiculous. On the contrary, Wolfe said, leaning back. It is containment, the only civilized response to chaos. Babysitting an heir-turned corpse-turned guest wasn't on my bingo card. But Fritz made up the pull-out in the guest room, and I set up my base with a chair, a paperback, and a cocoa mug that tasted like chalk stirred in regret. Grant didn't talk much. He stared at the ceiling like it held answers. I offered conversation, he declined. I offered bourbon, he accepted, then said nothing for another hour. Around midnight he asked, You believe me? I believe you're not telling everything, I replied, which is a start. At 2 a.m. he muttered something in his sleep. Check the ledger, I think, or maybe check the letters. By 4 I was the only one still awake. And when I finally nodded off, I dreamed of cigar cutters dancing on a ledger made of lies. The sun was up when I realized Grant was gone. No broken windows, no jimmied doors, just a faint trail of muddy footprints leading down the stairs, not out the front, but toward the garden. Then nothing. I found Fritz in the kitchen, furious over a missing bottle of cream and a wet towel in the sink. Before I could call the precinct, the phone rang. It was Kramer. His voice was clipped. "You've been holding out, Goodwin." "Define holding out." "Carl Royce, dead. About an hour ago. Stabbed, sapphire-handled cutter." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Kramer growled. "If that kid was in your house last night, and he's not there now, you've got 5 minutes to cough up a story before I show up with a warrant and a migraine." I looked at the muddy footprints, then at the towel. "Kramer," I said, "I think we're all about to get very, very busy. There are mornings when I ease into the office with my coffee, my socks match, and Fritz's cinnamon rolls have the decency to arrive warm. And then there are mornings when Inspector Kramer kicks in the front door like he's auditioning for a marching band and the role of angry tuba. "Where is he?" he growled, waving a sheaf of paper like it might bite someone. "Your boy Ansel vanished again, and now we've got a corpse with his initials practically monogrammed into the throat." I was halfway to offering him a seat when Fritz, bless his culinary instincts, peeked out and said, "The oxtail is ready, Mr. Goodwin." I seized the moment like a drowning man grabs a floaty. "Inspector," I said, "why not let the oxtail testify first? It's more tender than any witness you've brought me." He grumbled, but the stew won. By the time we were at the table, me, Wolfe, and Kramer, chewing and glaring in tandem, Wolfe finally deigned to speak. "Archie," he said, tapping his fingers on the tablecloth, "your line was almost clever. And your timing, for once, not criminal." I raised my spoon. "To stew and staying out of jail." Back in the office, with the oxtail safely digesting and Kramer's temper marginally cooler, the facts finally started walking in. "The cutter," he said, tossing a photograph across Wolfe's desk, "was found in Carl Royce's throat. Not beside it, not under it, in it." The photo showed a delicate sapphire-handled cigar cutter, blade slick, nestled like a deadly brooch between two purpling tendons. "Prints match Grant Ansel," Kramer said, leaning forward like he expected Wolfe to faint. Wolfe didn't. "Of course they do," Wolfe replied coolly. "That is precisely why they are worthless." Kramer barked a laugh that didn't make it past his mustache. "He disappears. The man he was fighting with ends up dead, and the weapon is his." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Not even guilt, Inspector, is so convenient." Kramer muttered something unprintable and turned to me. "Is he always like this?" "Only before lunch," I said. "After that, he gets smug." The photo lingered on the desk like an open wound. The cutter was real. So was the blood. But the truth? That, as Wolfe would say, remained regrettably theoretical. Once Kramer stormed out, coat flapping, muttering dire threats involving warrants and Wolfe's neck. Wolfe turned to me. "Archie, we must now collect the players, one by one. No improvisation." "You want the whole chorus line," I said, reaching for my notebook. "Who's on the guest list?" "Lou Ansel, Marietta Royce, Magda Roth. And if you can locate Miss Heloise St. James, she should be included. She has been absent too long to be innocent." "Heloise? The ex-singer with the fur hat collection?" "Indeed." By noon, the brownstone was booked tighter than a radio serial. I made the calls, smoothed the egos, and dodged more excuses than a cheating poker player. Every alibi was neat, too neat. Lou was working late. Marietta was reading alone. Magda claimed she was editing a manuscript, an excuse so dusty it should have come with a vacuum. I relayed it all to Wolfe. He nodded. "Lies arranged with such symmetry," he mused, "are always lies." I raised an eyebrow. "You planning to unravel them?" "Archie," he said, "I intend to slice them." By the time the doorbell rang, the game was already moving. Marietta Royce arrived in a tailored grey coat, eyes glassy and red-rimmed, mascara hanging on for dear life. She barely got past Fritz before her sob caught like a snag on silk. Carl and I didn't kill him, she said, each word tumbling over the necks like scared rabbits. I guided her into the front room and offered tissues. Wolfe remained in his chair, unmoved. She turned toward him with the desperation of someone who knows appearances matter. I swear I didn't know Grant was alive. We all thought. Yes, Wolfe said. Convenient. She choked on a sob. Do you think I'm lying? No. I think you're afraid. That stopped her. She blinked. Afraid of what? Of Grant, Wolfe replied. Your grief for Carl is performative. Your distress over Grant's return is not. She sank into the chair like it might swallow her whole. I loved Carl, she whispered. But you feared Grant. She didn't answer, but she didn't have to. Her silence weighed more than any denial. Wolfe nodded, satisfied. You may go, for now. She fled like the walls might accuse her. Lou Ansell came in wearing cologne strong enough to chase ghosts. He settled into the red chair like a man who thinks posture equals innocence. You don't need me, he said flatly. I'm clean now. Wolfe didn't blink. Cleanliness is not equivalent to transparency, Mr. Ansell. Lou scoffed. I told you, whatever happened back in Florida was not erased by time, Wolfe interrupted. Merely ignored. I handed him the photo of the cigar cutter. He barely glanced. Grant's toy, not mine. Do you consider him capable of murder? He shrugged. Depends on the mood and the moon. And Carl Royce? Lou's smirk wilted. Carl was a snake, but even snakes don't deserve blades in the throat. Poetic, Wolfe muttered, and implausible. I watched Lou closely. His hands were too still, his voice too even, the kind of calm that came with rehearsals. You rehearsed that line about snakes? I asked. He didn't answer, just stood. If you're finished, I'd like to go. No, Wolfe said simply. Lou's smile vanished. I've had enough of this. And I have had enough of performance, Wolfe replied. Lou sat back down. This act wasn't over yet. Daphne Royce came in dressed like the ghost of a debutante, all pale linen and borrowed pearls. She perched on the edge of the red settee as if the cushions were mined with traps. I don't recall anything about a second will, she said, brushing invisible dust from her knee. Carl kept his affairs. Complicated. Wolfe, lodged firmly in his chair with arms crossed on the slope of his belly, didn't blink. You were a witness. To what? To the original will, I said, flipping my notebook open, just for effect. Your signature's on it, right beside a Mr. Gerald Carrick, who swore he thought he was signing a flower delivery receipt. Her eyes widened, then dropped. That was a misunderstanding. Pfui, Wolfe muttered, reaching without looking into the drawer beside him. A misunderstanding does not produce this. He held up a glossy print Saul had delivered that morning, a close-up of Daphne's signature in blue ink, beneath the clause giving Marietta Royce complete control of the estate. Her lips parted, shut again. That's old. It is, Wolfe agreed. And your memory, madam, is more malleable than marble. That is often the first symptom of guilt. Daphne stood, trembling, her poise unravelling like cheap thread. I should speak to my lawyer. You will, Wolfe replied. But first, you will sit. She did. Magda Lorenz was 20 minutes late and smelled like a department store explosion. Jasmine, violets, and something too eager. Her hat alone could have hosted a flock of canaries. I haven't seen Grant in months, she said, settling into the armchair like it owed her money. I gave her a smile that could sand wood. Funny, considering you were spotted coming out of his apartment last week. And not by a blind man either. She huffed. I was just dropping off something. What? A book. She licked her lips. No, a scarf. You're unraveling, sweetheart, I told her. Pick a thread. She leaned in. Look, I didn't kill Carl. I barely knew him. That wasn't the question. I just wanted to calm Grant down, all right? He was furious. About the will, about his stepmother, about a lot. Wolfe stirred. When precisely did you offer this emotional balm? She hesitated. I don't remember the time. Convenient, Wolfe said. Memory loss must be contagious today. She flushed and reached for her bag. I made no move to stop her. She had said enough. Esther Royce didn't enter. She arrived in a cloud of civet and chilled hostility. She didn't sit when invited, and I didn't insist. There was something queenly about her, but the wicked stepmother variety. I haven't touched the cutter, she declared before Wolfe had asked. Splendid, Wolfe replied, dry as toast. Then perhaps you can account for your whereabouts the night Grant Ansell vanished. Her lips curved. He was in the house. I saw him asleep through the crack in the door. That did it. Wolfe's brows climbed like theatre curtains rising before Act 1. Indeed, he said softly. But you told Inspector Kramer the door was locked. She blinked. Did I? You did, I confirmed. With passion. Esther exhaled sharply. Then I misspoke. Madam, Wolfe said, you do not misspeak. You miscalculate. Her silence was her confession. She sat then, and for the first time looked small. The room cleared slowly, like a tide of suspects receding from the rocky shore of Wolfe's disdain. Daphne muttered something about injustice. Magda sniffled. Esther's heels clacked like punctuation on marble. Wolfe folded his napkin with care, though dinner was still an hour off. Archie. Yeah? Tomorrow, 5 o'clock. They shall return. Can I send embossed invitations with skulls on them? No, but tell them this. One of you killed Carl Royce. I shall demonstrate who. And if they don't show, they will. His tone didn't allow for any other outcome. He turned his gaze to the orchid shelves. The game, as they say, was afoot. At precisely 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang like a drumroll for doom. I opened the door and let the cast parade in. Daphne Royce wore gloves and nerves. Magda trailed perfume and guilt. Esther looked like a duchess condemned. Lou came last, as if being fashionably late could outrun the truth. They gathered not in the office, but in the dining room. Wolfe's idea. He claimed the chairs were better suited for prolonged discomfort. Fritz had cleared the sideboard and arranged 6 crystal tumblers of nothing but water. Drama without refreshment. Wolfe didn't stand. He didn't need to. Seated at the head of the table like a Roman emperor contemplating mercy, he folded his hands across the lower slopes of his girth and spoke. The solution, he said, his voice smooth as cognac and twice as expensive, is no longer hypothetical. It is inevitable. That got their attention. Even Magda sat straighter, as if spine would shield her from exposure. You have all lied, Wolfe continued, some with desperation, others with finesse. But lies, like poorly rooted orchids, wither under scrutiny. Esther's lips curled. Lou glanced at me. I smiled, helpfully. The time has come to exhume the truth, Wolfe said. And unlike the river's offerings, it will not decompose. You were all meant to believe, Wolfe began, that Grant Ansell drowned. No one spoke, not even Lou, who normally couldn't help himself around silence. The decomposed body, Wolfe said, was found wearing Grant's coat, shoes, and carrying identification. Convenient, no? Identifiable, Esther said coolly. Barely, Wolfe snapped. The body was bloated beyond recognition. Dental records were never used. No fingerprints, only fabric and guesswork. Magda's hand trembled near her glass but didn't lift it. It was a decoy, Wolfe declared. A cadaver acquired, dressed, and dumped, the goal being to terminate inquiry, to smother curiosity in the river's silt. Daphne whispered, Then where's Grant? Patience, Wolfe said, which from him is practically affectionate. What matters is motive. Carl Royce's death signaled danger. Someone feared the return of a long-exiled heir. Lou let out a breath. I filed it away. The decoy's timing was perfect, Wolfe went on. It gave an ending where none existed. It gave Esther peace of mind, and it gave someone else the opportunity to disappear. He paused. I do not deal in corpses unless they can name their killers. This one cannot, but Grant Ansell may still be able to speak, once he's found. The silence was vacuum-tight. Wolfe leaned slightly forward, which, for him, is the equivalent of a man leaping across a table. The corpse was dressed to deceive, he said, but the events of that night began with something more subtle. Camphor. Magda blinked, slowly. I could have counted the seconds between blinks. You once worked in alternative treatments, Wolfe continued. Pressure points, tinctures, herbal sedatives, camphor among them. She managed a smile that almost made it to her eyes. So, Wolfe said. A trace of camphor was found on Grant's pillow, a concentration high enough to induce stupor, not merely soothe. That doesn't mean… Foy, Wolfe barked. You dosed him. You were sent to his room under pretense, lulled him with perfume and hands, and applied the drug. I didn't… You did, Wolfe said, but not alone. You acted under instruction. You had no stake in Grant's demise, but you were manipulated. Magda gripped the chair arms like she was bracing for an earthquake. He trusted you, Wolfe said, enough to open the door. She said nothing, but her face gave up its secrets like loose change. You didn't kill him, Wolfe said softly, but you opened the gate. A tear slipped past her rouge. Esther Royce had the kind of composure you'd expect from a woman who practiced disappointment. But Wolfe wasn't aiming to dismay. He was aiming to corner. Madam, he said, you feared Grant Ansell. You feared him because he threatened your kingdom. She tilted her head. A son returning home is hardly a threat. It is, Wolfe said, if he carries a will, one written before your marriage, that disinherits you. Daphne gasped, but quieted when Wolfe raised a finger. Carl Royce knew about it. He wanted Grant to return. He may even have sent word to him. That made Carl inconvenient. Esther's jaw tensed. Wolfe took it as encouragement. When Grant resurfaced, your peace shattered. If the original will emerged, you would lose the Royce estate, the art, the servants, the prestige, all of it. She gave a faint, disdainful sniff. You couldn't act alone, Wolfe said. So you planted the idea. In Lou's mind, in Magda's hands. You choreographed the delay, not the murder. Esther's chin rose. Then who did? Wolfe smiled. We arrive. And he turned his head ever so slightly toward Lou. Lou Carrick had the look of a man sitting on a collapsing chair, upright, braced, and 1 inch from disaster. You've played the humble suitor well, Wolfe said, but even your loyalty has a price. Lou shook his head. I never wanted the money. You wanted freedom, Wolfe corrected. Money merely greased the escape. Wolfe gestured toward me, and I obliged, sliding the folder across the table. Inside, bank records, a map, and a photograph of Lou in Albany. On the night Grant disappeared. Grant didn't vanish, Wolfe said. You staged it, with his cooperation. He trusted you. Lou's voice cracked. You offered him an exit, a way to avoid the Royce clause. In return, you wanted a cut of the fortune. After Esther fell, after Daphne panicked, after Magda crumbled. Lou slumped. It wasn't supposed to get this messy. But it did, Wolfe said, because someone else killed Carl Royce to keep that will buried. He paused. And because you lied. That makes you complicit. Lou dropped his gaze. Wolfe turned to Kramer, who'd been leaning in the doorway long enough to memorize every word. Inspector, Wolfe said, you may wish to retrieve Mr. Ansell now. He is no longer lost, merely hiding. Wolfe's voice, steady as granite, filled the dining room like slow-poured brandy. Miss Esther, he began, his fingers steepled, possessed both the desperation and the ingenuity to commit murder in a manner most theatrical, and yet oddly crude. Esther stiffened. Her pearl necklace caught the light like a garret of gilt. Carl Royce was lured to the guest house under the pretext of finalizing a revised agreement, Wolfe went on. He was never meant to leave. The second cigar cutter, sapphire-handled and indistinguishable from Grant's, was already there. Archie here, and I was watching her jaw tighten like a spring wound trap. After Royce was dead, Wolfe continued, Miss Esther entered Grant's room. He was sleeping. Not by nature, but by design. A second administration of camphor-laced valerian, no doubt. She retrieved his hands, limp and suggestible, and pressed them against the weapon. Fingerprints, most obliging. That's insane, Esther hissed. Convenient, Wolfe corrected, and calculated. I couldn't. You did, Wolfe said, because you feared what Grant might soon reveal, the existence of a will that named him, not you, as sole heir. She didn't deny it, but she didn't confess either. She just stared at the table as if willing it to split and swallow her whole. The moment Wolfe gave the slightest nod, Saul Panzer stepped forward from the shadows, like the world's most courteous assassin. He held a folded sheaf of aged paper in a clear sleeve, as reverent as a priest carrying relics. The safe deposit box, Wolfe said, was held under the name Felix Ansel, a detail that went unnoticed because its contents were never claimed after his death. Mr. Panzer, with his usual efficiency, accessed it yesterday morning. Saul opened the sleeve, withdrew the document, and handed it to me. I placed it before Wolfe like a dealer sliding an ace. This is the original last will and testament of Felix Ansel, Wolfe announced, dated 1 year after the previous version, witnessed by Daphne Kroll, among others, unambiguous in its phrasing. His eyes found Esther like searchlights from a destroyer. It names Grant Royce, in full, by birth name and all aliases, as the sole heir to the Ansel estate. A silence hit the room so hard, you could hear cutlery lose confidence. Esther's face froze into the wax mask of polite horror. Marietta inhaled sharply. Lou muttered something about a damn setup. And Daphne? Daphne stared straight at the will like it might set itself on fire. Kramer didn't need a bullhorn. His grunt alone announced that things were about to get physical. He stood up, lumbered forward like a man heading toward paperwork he hated, and drew the warrant from his coat pocket. Esther Royce, he said, voice all gravel and no sympathy. You're under arrest for the murder of Carl Royce. You pompous little man, she hissed, rising. You think this is justice? No, Wolfe said lazily. It is simply arithmetic. Esther spun toward him. I did it for the family, to keep the rot out. That man was chaos wrapped in charm, and you know it. I know, Wolfe replied, that you murdered with intention and malice. Your motives, like your morals, are your own affair. Her eyes flared like gas jets, but the game was done. Kramer took her arm, not gently, and led her out. Her heels clicked against the marble like punctuation marks in a bitter, unwritten memoir. The brownstone emptied with the quiet dignity of a theatre after a performance that left more questions than answers. I stood by Wolfe's globe, spinning it idly, watching Magda drift out in a cloud of stale perfume and expensive doubt. I turned to Wolfe. So Magda walks? She walks, he replied, not looking up from the orchids he was now misting with ecclesiastical devotion. She helped. She drugged Grant, lied about her timeline, played go-between for Lou and Esther. Yes, Wolfe agreed, but she did not kill. Accessory. She is guilty, Wolfe said, of cowardice perhaps, of selective memory. But cowardice is not a crime, not yet. I frowned, letting that simmer. Do you think she knew the plan in full? Wolfe shrugged. Even pawns choose their direction. And with that, he turned back to his orchids, which, as far as I could tell, had never committed a felony in their lives, though they'd certainly witnessed a few. The morning after the storm tends to be suspiciously sunny. I was at my desk, feet up, pretending to organize a drawer that hadn't seen discipline since Prohibition, when the buzzer sounded. Grant Royce, still walking the tightrope between grateful and bewildered. He entered with a nervous smile and a cedar box tucked under his arm like a confession he'd rehearsed but never delivered. "This is for Mr. Wolfe," he said. "A small thank you." I took the box, nodded, and carried it into the plant room. Wolfe, elbow deep in orchid fertilizer, regarded it as if I'd brought him a dead rodent. "I presume it does not contain currency," he said. "Nope. Cuban cigars. Sealed." He grunted. I opened the box. The aroma hit like Havana whispering secrets. Wolfe didn't twitch, blink, or bless it with a thank you. He examined the box for 10 full seconds, then, with surgical disinterest, said, "Put it on the cabinet." Grant stood awkwardly for another minute, like he thought Wolfe might shake his hand. Wolfe didn't. I did. Twice. Then I showed him out. Wolfe eyed the cigars once more. A primitive offering. Tobacco has enslaved more minds than murder has freed. Look, I'm not a smoker, not officially, but I've been around enough fancy parties and Cuban connections to know a cigar that costs rent when I see one. So once Grant was gone and Wolfe had retreated to his room for his pre-lunch sulk, I cracked that cedar box and picked out the smoothest, darkest one of the bunch. I lit it with all the swagger of a bootlegger in a silk suit. First puff, smooth. Second puff, bold. Third puff, like licking a radiator full of angry bees. I coughed once, then again. Then it became a performance piece titled Lung Collapse in 3 Acts. Wolfe entered the office precisely then, of course, arms folded, expression bordering on theological contempt. "You appear to be dying," he observed. "Just savoring," I wheezed. "Intensely." "Your bravado," Wolfe said, "is exceeded only by your gullibility. Those cigars were likely aged in an environment containing guava, diesel fuel, and regret." I stubbed it out, eyes watering. "You want the rest?" "No," Wolfe sniffed. "I have no intention of inhaling someone else's gratitude, especially when wrapped in combustion." Fair. But I kept the box. Might use it for paper clips or ironic vengeance. Wolfe had taken his usual post-lunch throne, the red leather chair that should have come with its own Latin motto, when he finally condescended to philosophize. He leaned back, folded his arms over the equator of his girth, and said, "Smoke, Archie, is the natural enemy of clarity. It obscures. It seduces. It flatters chaos." "Poetic," I said. "Should I write that down?" "Do," he replied, "though I doubt posterity will consult your notepad." He stared at the box of cigars on the cabinet like it owed him an apology. "The entire case," he said, "was one long fugue of smoke. Lies told to preserve illusions, deceptions wrapped in etiquette, and people pretending to be noble while hiding sharp instruments behind their backs." "Yeah," I said, "but in the end, you cut through it." "I," Wolfe said, "opened a window. It is not my fault others prefer the haze." I glanced at him. "You're really not going to try one?" "No. Not even out of curiosity." He looked at me as if I'd suggested seasoning duck with margarine. "Archie, some things are best admired from a safe distance." And there it was. The world according to Nero Wolfe. Logic sharp, lungs clean. The phone rang at 3:04. Fritz was polishing silver. I was polishing my pride after surviving a cigar ambush. Wolfe was reading Montaigne. It was a perfect storm of domestic stillness. I picked up. "Nero Wolfe's office." "Goodwin, put him on," came the voice of doom. Inspector Kramer, sounding like a man one coffee short of tolerable. I relayed the request. Wolfe sighed and extended a hand like Caesar, accepting tribute. I handed him the receiver and backed away as a precaution. "Wolfe," he said, butter smooth. "Don't start. I want your notes. Everything. Typed, unedited, full sequence." "No." Silence. Then, "What do you mean, no?" Wolfe leaned back lazily. I mean the negation of your demand. I will not be your stenographer. Kramer let loose a verbal boulder. I caught only fragments, bureaucratic garbage, egotistical gasbag, and my favorite, overfed sphinx. Wolfe waited it out, then added, your department has the body, the weapon, and the confession. What remains is mine to archive. Or to forget. He hung up. I blinked. That was frosty. I gave him Latin in a bucket of ice, Wolfe said. It seemed appropriate. I didn't argue, mostly because I couldn't stop grinning. At precisely 6:45, Fritz appeared in the doorway, apron crisp, smile discreet. Dinner is ready, saffron duck with a persimmon glaze. Wolfe, who'd been staring at the globe like he suspected the southern hemisphere of conspiracy, rose with the dignity of a senator in a toga. Excellent, he said. Come, Archie. I'm still recovering from the last time I inhaled something exotic. You may observe in silence, Wolfe offered generously. We made our way to the dining room. The table was set like a diplomatic summit. Silver gleamed. The duck glistened. The persimmon glaze had the sheen of something that could restart diplomacy between feuding nations. Wolfe cut into his portion with surgical grace. I waited for the verdict. He chewed, swallowed, nodded. Fritz, he said, you have made art. Fritz beamed, said nothing, and vanished like a magician with a clean apron. Dinner proceeded without comment, not because there was nothing to say, but because for Wolfe, a perfect meal earned reverence, not chatter. And so we ate, the rotund genius, the coughing assistant, the ghost of a cigar, and the echo of a murder that now belonged to the silence between bites. After dinner, Wolfe ascended to his orchid sanctuary. Fritz vanished to scrub pans with the kind of dedication found only in monasteries. That left me, Archie Goodwin, alone in the office with the lingering scent of victory, duck, and imported tobacco. I poured myself a splash of brandy and looked at the sapphire-handled cutter resting in our evidence drawer like a retired assassin. It was a beautiful thing. Too beautiful, really. That was the point, wasn't it? The elegance of it had fooled Carl, had framed Grant, had nearly let Esther waltz away clean. Funny how the fancy stuff always carries sharper edges. I thought about motives, greed, inheritance, revenge. But what stuck with me wasn't the killer's reason. It was the weapon, designed to charm, built to slice, hidden in plain sight. I sipped my drink, let the quiet sink in. Some cases end in gunfire, some in screaming. This one ended in dinner and polished silver. I stood, turned off the desk lamp, and muttered to the empty room. Sometimes elegance can kill. Then I left the office dark, except for the faint glow from the ashtray, where one cigar sat unfinished, like a joke that didn't land. In the end, it wasn't the cutter's gleam, or the scent of camphor that unraveled the truth. It was silence. The silence of a forged will, a sleeping scapegoat, and a family so tangled in greed that murder became a form of inheritance. Wolfe, immovable as ever, let the pieces fall where they must. And me, I watched it all, with a cigar I never finished, and a question still burning. Do you believe protecting a legacy can ever justify the destruction it leaves behind? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed the mystery, be sure to like the video, share it with someone who loves detective stories, and subscribe for more. Not every case ends with applause, but the truth, once found, always echoes.